The Creeping Horror, Part 3. My father paused to compose himself before continuing. I knelt by her and put pressure on the wound, but it was too deep. It was so bloody. I told her I loved her. She just gurgled in shock. She died shortly after. I wept for a few seconds before I heard Alan exclaim, "Jesus Christ, what happened?" The pieces slid into place. She had wanted to scare me. She crept up behind me, breathing heavily like the creeping horror legend. She had only wanted to play a joke on me. Alan knelt at the body and pressed a hand into the ragged wound and took her pulse with his other hand. He paused a few seconds, as if time would prove him wrong. It didn't. He turned back towards me and was in the process of telling me, "She's dead. We have to call the police." When I stabbed him in the chest, he tried to stumble back and crawl away, but I was on him with my pocket knife. I raised the blade several times and brought it down into his body. The third stab slipped between the ribs and pierced the heart. I had panicked, and in my fear of being caught in a prank gone awry, I had killed my best friend and my girlfriend. I listened to his tale in shock. He told me how he left the bodies where they lied. He told me of the months spent in anticipation of being revealed by the police. That time never came. He said it all with a sense of quasi-relief and shame. He spoke of the guilt that had grown in him, which was compounded by my inquiries into the creeping fiend. The very thought of that memory rent wounds deep into his soul. It was only now that he was able to confess to his crimes, because he was so close to death's door. My father, the benevolent and loving man, had the weight of two souls on his mind. He had spent 30 years with that secret and no one to tell it to. It had eaten away at his conscience for 30 fucking years, and when he finally told someone, I doubt it eased the pain of it all. He wanted to cleanse his conscience, but was afraid of the consequences. It was then that I learned my father was a coward. He couldn't face the consequence and bring consolation to the two families of his friends. He fled from the truth, and with time, the crime eventually became unsolved. The man I saw as my hero, my role model, was nothing more than a coward. He asked for another shot of Demerol. I gave it to him. I plunged the syringe into the small rubber-stopped bottle and withdrew the entire solution. My father watched me with bright and delirious eyes. I leaned in close to him and whispered, "I love you." He mumbled something about Justine, but he was slipping further each second. I had already given him so much Demerol. Just a little bit more was all that was needed. I pierced his arm with the needle and injected the entire solution into him. My last memory of him was looking into his face. His face was eerily similar to the emotions he showed me that one day so long ago, when I had tried to call the creeping horror with my friend Benjamin. The emotions expressed in his face were that of unbridled fear and uncontrollable guilt. He died looking that way. I'm writing this now because I know that he is dead. I killed him. He slipped away peacefully after an overdose of Demerol. I know that the families of Alan and Justine deserve some sort of respite. They deserve justice, but that time is gone. Finally, their killer can be revealed. At the end of it all, I am ambivalent. There are two conflicting emotions, my childhood admiration and respect I have for my father, and the horror of the terrible secret he bore for over 30 years. He was my idol, and he was also a fiend capable of unspeakable horrors. I won't conclude the story by saying there never was a monster, because that's not true. The monster wasn't something as simple as flesh and blood, nails and fangs. The monster isn't isolated in the small town of Simsbury, Connecticut. It is everywhere. It was and is a part of us. The creeping horror was my father, the day he accidentally murdered his girlfriend and stabbed his best friend to death to protect himself. The creeping horror was me that night when I gave him that fatal overdose. In some horrible way, the creeping horror is inside all of us. It is in who we are and what we can become, given circumstances that are entirely out of our control.